Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the May 29th, 2025 Night with the Experts. My name is Dave Kraft. I'm Director of Nuclear Energy Information Service. We're based in Chicago. And every last Thursday of the month, with the exception of November, usually, we
Oh, December.
provide, well, one of
Oh,
those
yeah, I'm
months.
sorry. Yeah.
Uh, we will bring to you various experts from around literally the world, where you'll have an opportunity to hear what they have to say and then get into question and answer and dialogue with them at the very end. So we're very glad you could make it to the program tonight with our guest, Paul Gunter from Beyond Nuclear. I'm going to be a little selfish this evening and mention those of you who are from Illinois. We have an action alert out because our state legislature is in its closing days of its spring session, and they are trying to repeal the Illinois nuclear construction moratorium, which would open Illinois up to the construction of virtually any kind of nuclear power plant. So at the very end of the meeting, we'll give some instructions on what people can do about that. And it's not just confined to people from Illinois, because as we know, radioactive accidents don't stop at the borders. So we invite you to participate as well. So again, thank you for joining us. And I will turn it over here to my colleague from the board, Jan Budart, who will introduce tonight's guest. Jan, you want to take it away?
Sure. Our speaker tonight is Paul Gunter. He is a distinguished expert on nuclear matters, working with Beyond Nuclear, along with Kevin Camps and several other stellar people, including his wife. And I wanted to mention that I saw Paul for the first time in person in San Diego when the Samuel Lawrence Foundation sponsored a conference, and he appeared at that conference with other people of national um, of national renown, including Mark Jacobson, Libby Halevi, and Stephanie Cook, and Admiral Len Herring. So I'm going to let Paul introduce himself. I just wanted to let you tell you about my experience of actually meeting Paul in person. So anyway, go ahead, Paul. Please introduce yourself and your topic, and go ahead with what you have to say.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to NEIS for the invitation. Um, you've got quite an archive of material here over the years. That's going to be a real living source of information and inspiration. But for me, I have to say that I'm now about to celebrate 50 years in the anti-nuclear movement. We're coming up on the anniversary of the Clamshell Alliance activities at Seabrook, New Hampshire. But we started organizing in 1975 for civil disobedience actions, nonviolent direct action at a construction site that those actions began in August of 1976, but we started working on that 50 years ago, and we've seen a lot of change that I think is important. We'll recount some of that tonight, but I became involved with some notoriety in that 16-year project to wind up at the Nuclear Information and Resource Service in Washington, D.C. in 1991. And then we started Beyond Nuclear in 2007. And, we've got, I believe, a viable anti-nuclear movement that, spans the country now. So I think that the work here at NEIS is an important component to that. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to share tonight. So with that, I will just go ahead and share my screen. And we'll get started. Okay. Very good. So, you know, unleashing American energy was among the first of the executive orders that were signed by Donald Trump on January 20th, 2025. Trump's order initiated the immediate review of all agency actions that potentially burden the development of domestic energy resources. And in particular, he listed, quote, the attention to oil, natural gas, coal, hydropower, biofuels, critical mineral, and nuclear energy resources. However, it was nuclear power's explicit unleashing was to come from being the peaceful component to the development of tens of thousands of atomic bombs. And that was in the hands of President Nixon's vision in 1973 to originally unleash the atoms with Project Independence and 1,000 operating nuclear power plants in the United States by the year 2000, that was his vision. Unfortunately for the industry's plans, that they imposed their own uncontrollable construction costs and extreme financial risk to their investors that eventually canceled nearly as many reactor projects as were completed. Today, only 94 units are operating in the United States with an average life of 42 years. Let's see. So there's we've recognized that there's now a full-blown bipartisan effort and White House engagement that runs from the Nixon era, but really it was the Bush administration and the Energy Policy Act of 2005 that launched by bipartisan congressional legislation to re-engage a national energy policy for a nuclear renaissance that never occurred. The Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 invested significantly more federal funds into renewables than nuclear power, but still has squandered billions of dollars more to keep uneconomical aging reactors operating and finances the restart of a number of permanently closed reactors that are now in the works. Biden also signed the Accelerating Deployment of Versatile Advanced Nuclear for Clean Energy, or ADVANCE Act, that was in 2023, establishing what's now the prelude for renewed nuclear misadventures. But it was Donald Trump's executive orders that were issued just not even a week ago, that on May 23, 2025, that has raised a lot of concerns. These are initially have been covered by the press as 4 executive orders, but we've included a 5th executive order that was also signed on May 23, 2025, that is critical to the issues. But those executive orders are deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security, ordering the reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, reforming the nuclear reactor testing at the Department of Energy, reinvigorating the nuclear industrial base, and the Beyond Nuclear has added a fifth Trump executive order restoring gold standard science that was also published with that batch, that is critical and relevant and very controversial to the nuclear industry issue. So let's look at the deploying advanced nuclear reactor technologies for national security. The order designates artificial intelligence as mission critical to national security that needs a resilient, secure, and reliable energy supply for defense facilities. So this order focuses on blending civilian commercial nuclear power in a closer coordination with defense facilities and the Department of Energy institutions. These advanced nuclear reactors, or we'll call them ANR for tonight, include Generation 3+ reactors. We assume they include Generation 4 reactors as well, but this order didn't specify it. Small modular reactors, micro reactors, and stationary and mobile reactors for domestic use and notably for export to our allies and commercial partners. It also enables the private sector investment and use of ANRs to support the national security across the federal government and to fully leverage federally owned uranium and plutonium declared access to the US defense needs. It's also enabled the defense secretary to designate the Secretary of Army as the executive agent to establish and utilize first ANRs operated and regulated by the Army at domestic military base and bases no later than September 30th, 2028. So the next order looks at ordering reform of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The order cites the NRC's failed to license new reactors because the agency is too focused on risk aversion. Trump blames the NRC for this in that the regulations are overly burdensome and thus overly costly to the industry. And the order construes that the NRC shall prioritize the benefits of increased availability of nuclear power to our economy and national security. So the whole idea is that the order basically establishes the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to make reductions in the NRC workforce with the wholesale revision of regulations and guidance documents devoted to new reactor licensing, relicensing of existing reactors, restarting closed reactors, and resuming canceled reactor licensing. It further establishes deadlines, a whole series of deadlines, but we'll cover this one, the 18 months for final decisions on licensing applications for reactor construction and operation permits, and 1 year for relicensing existing reactors. So this orders the NRC to reconsider the linear no threshold dose model as well, and the as low as reasonably achievable standard that in the Trump terms all lack sound scientific basis and produce irrational results. So, this is a big concern because, there's these are the LNT, the linear no threshold dose model, really begins with the atomic bomb studies and has been renewed. And all through that process, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has recognized that there's no safe threshold where there is no risk to health consequences, and that is part of a transparency that the Trump administration is now trying to close. The So similarly, this would also streamline the public hearing process, which has been available to the public to address the license amendment process, and a whole host of licensing and new licensing and relicensing of reactors. And this is where I think that the order most explicitly exposes the Trump administration undermining the public's due process regarding the undisputable, still hazardous nuclear power, and further strips away the appearance of maintaining an independent federal regulatory agency and exercising its due diligence in the interest of public health and safety and security and environmental protection. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission was abolished by Congress with the creation of the Energy Reorganization Act in October of 1974, precisely because it could no longer maintain the facade of being both the chief promoter of nuclear power and the unfettered atomic power expansion in the United States, as well as an unbiased regulator in the interest of public health and safety and environmental protection. Let's see here. The next slide is here, the reforming the nuclear reactor testing of the Department of Energy. This, is basically the Trump administration's effort to streamline the America's industrial evolution for establishing the fundamental technological viability of the industry's test reactors, particularly for DOE test reactors. And by July 22, 2025, the Energy Secretary shall introduce guidance regarding what counts as a qualified test reactor for purposes of this order. Now that's a big concern because this is going to again streamline and make the process more opaque to exactly what's going into these test programs for test reactors. And by August 21st, 2025, the Energy Secretary shall take action to revise regulations, guidance, procedures, and practices of the Department of Energy and the national labs and any other entity under the department's jurisdiction to significantly expedite the review, approval, and deployment of advanced reactors that come out of those test results. The order further establishes that the Energy Secretary shall reform the department's rules governing compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, surprisingly quickly by no later than June 30th, 2025. So the move is afoot already to take NEPA out of the oversight process. And in the process, the Energy Department will go through the similar DOGE team, dismantling of and downsizing of the Department of Energy. The other order establishes reinvigorating the nuclear industry base. And this basically goes about strengthening the domestic nuclear fuel cycle first and foremost, with a report by the Energy Secretary to the President by January 18, 2026, recommending, among a number of items, national policy to support the management of spent fuel and high-level radioactive waste, an evaluation of reprocessing spent fuel managed by the Defense Department and the Department of Energy, an analysis of transferring spent fuel from reactors to government-owned, privately operated reprocessing facility. And then by September 20th, 2025, the Energy Secretary shall develop a plan to expand domestic uranium conversion capacity with enrichment capabilities for low enriched uranium, high enriched uranium, and high assay low enriched uranium, which is particularly designated for the advanced reactors. It further goes about expanding the nuclear energy workforce by invigorating federal, state, and local, primarily nuclear engineering training and education. The fifth order that we wanted to bring up that's we believe in critically important is that the Trump executive order has set about to describe and rework a standard or method considered to be the most reliable or accurate in all specific fields of science. So in our concern is this is particularly the concern that Trump's first term presidency raised doubt in his own integrity. And here he's going about now establishing a new look at the standard that's to be applied to all government sciences, like the research integrity of his own order that's looking to reevaluate the radiation exposure levels and the public health protection. So the new order is, however, silent on how it would prevent political interference before disseminating its gold standard for scientific findings. Instead, Section 7 of the order's enforcement and oversight designates a Trump political appointee can decide when a finding is politicized science and bring enforcement action from the administration against the source of that, what they call misinformation. Which, now this brings us to the whole notion of what kind of gold standard are we really talking about? In the real world lesson, we think it's being unlearned. Clearly, the Trump idea of gold standard is to the emolument of the Trump administration and his friends and associated industries versus the idea of a gold standard of science for the most reliable and accurate way of exploring the many issues with public health and safety and environmental protection being the goal. And the idea that this really provides us with the opportunity to once again look at one of several stark warnings in the United States that was just short of a nuclear meltdown as a result of effectively circumventing regulatory oversight of a disintegrating nuclear power industry in favor of extending production agendas and stretching safety margins. And this in particular was the example that you're looking at here with the Davis-Besse nuclear power station, which if you look up in the left-hand corner, this is the picture that was provided to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in April of 2020, just before the plant was to go back online for another operating period. The plant was shut down in 2022 to basically provide, the refuel, start the refueling outage. But the NRC had a concern that particularly the NRC staff had a concern that this plant should not be allowed to go back online. And whether or not they actually incorporated this photo up in the right-hand corner in their consideration, they certainly went through a fairly good process of regulatory guidance that put public health and safety first. This was with regard to the regulatory guide 1.174 that had a good standard by which they could make a determination of just how much risk plant operations should go through before the staff calls a shutdown. And that order went through the process, but at the same time, when it came to the restart, that order was pocketed by senior NRC management. And when they restarted the plant when they shut it down in 2022, they identified that there had been a leak in a sleeve, the stainless steel sleeve that went through the top of the reactor pressure vessel. So this middle photo, you're looking at the top of the reactor pressure vessel, and in the upper part of that photo, you see the sleeve and where the control rod goes in and out of that reactor pressure vessel. And under pressure of 2,000 pounds per square inch, the borated corrosive coolant of that reactor had penetrated that crack in that sleeve and had released high pressure borated steam that then condensed and fell down on the top of the carbon steel part of the reactor, and over time had been eating its way through concentrated boric acid down through 6 3/4 inches of carbon steel until it reached the inner stainless steel liner, which stopped the corrosive value. But then the corrosion started spreading out until it reached the size of where you could fit a pineapple in that hole. And the stainless steel liner, if you look over in the bottom right-hand corner, that you see the liner there on the bottom, which is resisting the corrosive quality of the borated coolant. But that liner was stretching out into the cavity that was being created above it. And according to the results of the scientific evaluation done after the plant was shut down, that we were maybe as close as weeks to months from a reactor pressure vessel rupture from this corrosive event that had been going on probably for years and had escaped the the scrutiny that should come with any gold standard science, but it didn't. And so we could go on to talk about how the same gold standard science has not been applied to fire protection of nuclear power stations that have come as close to cable fires that could render control operations inoperable, or the whole idea of how quickly cracks grow in safety critical components, or how quickly they can embrittle to the point where the coolant water could create a temperature shock on a hot reactor pressure vessel that causes it to shatter like glass. But again, this is the importance that we have to realize, that as the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is looking at being cut down and shaved of its regulatory oversight and the transparency that we still have, and participation that the public still can exercise in these proceedings, that's going to disappear under these Trump orders. So I just want to raise your attention in closing here that, there is as I mentioned, there is this anniversary that's coming up. I want to draw your attention to a shameless promotion here of a film that's available on YouTube free. So you just look up Acres of Clams on YouTube, and you'll see this this film that is an archival collection of the activity, the nonviolent civil disobedience, the public education, the political, social, and societal movement that started the anti-nuclear movement nationally across this country, that began really on the New Hampshire seacoast. So this is an opportunity. I just want you to see it's quite informative, and it was a very low budget, but we think it's pretty good. So with that, we'll close it right there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. Go ahead, Dave. You want to make a transition?
All right. You already have started it off for us. We're going to move to the next phase of the evening, where you have an opportunity to ask questions of Paul or get into cross discussions. I want to remind people that all of our Night with the Experts programs are taped. If you don't want to appear on tape, make sure you have your camera turned off. So that one's on you. And I will mention that at the end of the evening, those of you who did register, and you all did, will receive a copy of the chat room, which I will now enable. you'll be able to leave comments in the chat, and those will be shared with everyone when we send that out later tonight. All right, so now I will turn it over to my colleague Jan, who's going to facilitate the next portion of the meeting. And Paul, I want to thank you for both a current situation update, but also resurrecting the infamous Davis-Besse as
Yeah.
kind of the gold standard of examples of what could go wrong. So thanks for being with us. Jan, take it away.
Okay, we're going to have a question and answers session right now that will last an hour, given that and it often goes longer if the speaker wants to continue, and it depends on how the questioning goes. Everybody is entitled to ask a question and have one follow-up. If you wish to make a comment, please let me know in advance, because your comments will be confined to 3 minutes so that everybody will get a chance. If we get to the end of the question and answer period and nobody has, and you have already asked a question and the speaker is willing to go on, then I will give you a chance to ask another question. So it looks like we're starting out with Alfred Meyer and then going to Connie. And I'm having trouble here. I can't see the hands, but I'm assuming that there's Alfred and then Connie and then Mark Lundholm. So we'll start with Alfred. Go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you very much, NEIS, for providing this wonderful event, and Paul, for your, as ever, remarkable amount of information so clearly presented. It's very much appreciated. I wanted to kind of refine one point you made, if I might, and then also ask you a question. The refinement is, I thought I heard you say that it was the atomic bomb study that fostered the notion of the linear no threshold theory of danger from radiation, which just says that all radiation harms you. And it's my understanding that the wonderful book, which I highly commend, the scientists who alerted us to the dangers of radiation by Ian Fairley and Paul, your colleague, Cindy Folkers. The very first person they mention is Herman Muller, who in 1928, I believe, or 26 maybe, at Columbia University, X-rayed fruit flies and found that there was no safe dose. And this concept underlies the whole regulation of the radiation health impacts, and it's I just can't stress its importance to the protection of the population. So very quickly, I'll get to my question, and that is, do you feel that the executive orders, which I presume you've read more fully than I have, but to me, they completely support the notion that the intent of the nuclear enterprise in total is for nuclear weapons and the nuclear navy propulsion with which to deliver those weapons? Thanks again for that presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for that clarification. Well, the it makes it clearer now today than ever that the military and commercial power nuclear industry are joined at the hip. What's most alarming about these orders is that it's now out in the open that the commercial industry and the military nuclear industry are going to be simultaneously enriching and managing the creation of weapons grade. The HALEU fuel starts us on the path towards nuclear weapons grade material, and they're going to be one of the these orders. I didn't have time to really get into the depth of the detail, but one of the startling details is that the Trump order talks about DOD facilities working in all 48 contiguous states. Why they left out Hawaii and Alaska is kind of a mystery, but they're going to be, and again, they're taking the DOE and the DOD will be doing the design approval. They will be doing the regulatory oversight. They'll be doing the licensing. So they're putting the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as a bystander
Yeah.
to this whole process. And with that, there's going to be no transparency. We're going to watch. We're watching. You've raised the idea of propulsion submarines, but we're watching this whole thing go down right now, below the level of if these orders are come into play and go unchallenged, which is key here, that we will no longer have any kind of participatory democracy or regulatory, transparent regulatory oversight into atomic weapons and atomic power. So you're right. It's, and you've pointed this out many times, and take every opportunity to point this out. This here is another case in point that they've always been joined at the hip, educationally, rotating the cycle, but now they're production-wise collaborating.
Well, Trump talks about we're behind two countries, and I'll take a wild guess that that's Russia and China. And this is the military's severe challenge, is developing adequate infrastructure, both academic, in particular academic, how to draw smart young kids into the nuclear field, as well as maintaining this vast industrial infrastructure. But
Yeah. Well, thank you for the answer and the question, Alfred. But the Atomic Energy Commission was disbanded because it was both regulator and promoter, and that was impossible. So now this is a regression to something that we corrected many years ago. I'm going to call on Connie Klein, and then Mark Lundholm, and then Teresa. So Connie, you go ahead and ask your question, please.
You were on mute.
You're on. Okay, good.
No, she's not on mute.
Yeah, good.
We can't hear you, Connie. You're talking and we can't hear you.
I wonder if she dropped off. So maybe go to Mark and we'll come back to Connie.
Yeah, okay. We're going to go to Mark and then come back to you and see if you can fix whatever the audio problem is. Mark Lundholm, will you please unmute and ask your question? Good.
Yeah, it should be a fairly quick one. I think I recall hearing that Jennifer Granholm had made a statement that the Hanford site was fully remediated and they were going to put solar farms out there and stuff like that, which I thought was completely laughable. From what I've read, it'll never be cleaned up. Any comments on that? Was that true? But maybe it was true, and I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, that's my question.
I didn't hear that comment, but if it was made, it's absolutely false. We're still, the Hanford site is an accident waiting to happen.
Yes.
And there's no place for this corrosive, explosive, radioactive mess to go. So that's far from remediation.
Oh, I keep pouring money into it and nothing happens. So, yeah. Nice deal for somebody, but I wouldn't want to work there. Thank
And
you.
there's a website, hanfordchallenge.org, that explores this every week. And you can always go to that website. They have meetings similar to this of experts that discuss the problem.
Yeah,
and,
but would you put that link in the chat? And I'll see that. So
Oh,
thank
it's
you.
just hanfordchallenge.org. Hanford. Thank you for the question, Mark, and the answer, Paul. And we'll go to Teresa Brady. Please unmute yourself.
Okay,
Good.
and I just want to comment. I see Connie's question. She typed it into the chat. Okay, so my question is, these were done by executive order, not by a bill in Congress. Is there anything we can do to stop these? I think that the current budget bill is, Trump is asking to be exempt from court review. And so our main recourse would be to go to court. And is anybody going to court about these at this time? And does anybody else know if the HR1 that was in the House, the budget resolution bill, does remove Trump from the having review at court? Those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, these are challengeable in court. You know, just like the blanket cut of the congressionally approved budget to the National Public Radio, you know, Trump's interceding here despite Congress's appropriations and legislation. This is an opportunity for court action. I might add that that's easier said than done, but
Yeah.
it is, you know, there, as we've been seeing across the board, these court actions at the federal court level and even Supreme Court decisions have been interceding and stopping these Trump orders. So more often than not. So it is, however, going to need to be a coalition effort from the public interest community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is not materialized yet, but we've started the idea of having discussions about who might be willing to present the conduit and which part of these orders would be the most direct. But clearly the Trump administration is challenging the constitutional right to due process in events that affect our right to life, and as well as affecting the due diligence of a congressionally funded, a congressionally created, I should say, regulatory body that has public health, safety, and in environmental interest in interest. However, Congress has surrendered some of that in that they have promoted now, particularly one of the aspects of the Advanced Nuclear Act of 2023, prioritizes the benefit of more nuclear power over public health and safety and security and environmental protection. And that unfortunately was a near unanimous sentiment of Congress to essentially set the reset the mission statement of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as it had been established under the in the abolition of the Atomic Energy Commission, but never really bloomed. It was a more of a change of window dressing. Having been there at the start of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and their licensing process, we saw that the agency, though claiming one thing, was really a paper tiger that was paid for by licensing fees rather than in the public interest.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm wondering if Connie is satisfied with that answer because her question was so similar. Okay, she's nodding her head. And now we'll go to Roger Johnson. Will you please ask your question, Roger, and unmute yourself first? And also, we'd like to see you, but whatever.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that easily, but the nuclear renaissance has been bothering us for some time, and now Trump has politicized this whole nuclear issue. I don't think we're really very good at politics, and the whole thing has been politicized. And so the public doesn't know about all of this. And this is very disturbing that nobody knows the danger of nuclear power. We know it's expensive. We know it's dangerous. We know it's unreliable. We know that nuclear power plants are shut down from 34 to 81 days in the last decade. And it's an environmental unfriendly form of energy. So looking for ways to deal with this, I want to refer to the National Academy of Sciences proposal to study cancer in a 50-kilometer radius around 6 nuclear power plants in the country. That was proposed in 2014. The NRC refused to do it. Then one of our congressmen, Mike Levin and others, was able to get the funding for the Congress to get the HHS to support it. And then the HHS was pressured by the industry and they dropped it and they refused to do it. And now it's in limbo. Now, this cancer study, I think, could be one of the best ways to possibly reverse what's going on and what's happening. It's non-political, it's scientific. Cancer is one of the leading causes in the country. And right now it's in limbo. If they were to do a cancer study and they found cancer, that's the end of the nuclear industry right there, okay? And if they have ambiguous results, then at least the public could be alerted that there are serious issues, health issues involved with nuclear power plants. And we already have the reports in Germany and France and so on, where there are effects on women and children. Now, if they fail to find effects, that doesn't mean anything because, everybody in science knows that you can't prove the null hypothesis. So failure to find effect doesn't mean there is no effect. So how to support this? Charles Ferguson, Dr. Ferguson is a physicist. He runs the Nuclear and Radiation Studies Board at the National Academy of Sciences. I would like everybody to contact him and say, we would like to get that study done. I would like everybody to contact their congressman, ask them to contact Congressman Mike Levin here in District 47, which is where Santa Onofre is located. And I've been trying to get Adam Schiff involved too. I talked to him personally about this. There seems to be blocking it, but I think if it became a reality and they want to block it, it could be a big issue. It's a scientific study of major importance to the public, and there are about 100 million Americans who live near nuclear power facilities. It's a really, really big issue, and it's going nowhere. So if you could ask your congressional representatives to contact Mike Levin, if you could ask them to contact Charles Ferguson at the NRC, go read the report. It's a simple 30-page proposal of how they intend to study cancer. So I don't know if anybody'd like to contact us, but I see this as maybe the only possible opening other than a nuclear accident that's going to get the public alerted to this huge problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Now, I would like to,
Maybe would Paul like to respond to that in any way?
I would.
Yeah, you know, we were engaged in when the National Academies of Science originally got a contract proposal from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because, you know, the whole issue of cancer uh, consistently was coming up in licensing hearings as not being addressed in the deployment and of nuclear reactors and relicensing. And so they ventured out with a contract for a two-phase study in 2010, I believe. And they actually released a pilot program that provided two epidemiological models that had an emphasis on children as well. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission canceled the contract because they said it would cost too much and take too long. And then they went about building White Flint Unit 3 here in Rockville, Maryland, for the expansion of more nuclear power plant licenses with um, the new reactor licenses that they were anticipating on seeing, but that never happened. So, you know, I'd agree that this should be an effort, and it would take uh, it would take some appropriate help from Congress to do it. But this has been this has been this has been the bottleneck all along.
yeah. Thank you. I didn't mention that another way of raising your hand, so to speak, is to put a question in the chat. And we have a very distinguished person here. Her name is Kristen Schrader Frichette, and she has asked a question in the chat. So I'm gonna, instead of, I'm running through the chat looking for it, and I'm wondering if Kristen would just go ahead and ask her question. Kristen,
Yeah, thanks. My question is what we can do in the courts, because I don't know that much about the law, and I think Teresa has already raised that. A couple of you have already raised that issue, and I'm pretty ignorant about it. But since I have just a minute, let me just speak about the studies. No study is going to do any good unless it avoids two mistakes of virtually all nuclear studies that have been done. If they ignore wind velocity, particularly for noble gases, which one of the main things coming out of the core melts, they typically ignore wind direction and velocity, and then typically only measure distance from reactors, or look at whether the reactor is in a particular county, and then look at either county or census tract cancer rates. And that's why they often, some of the studies who use those flawed methodologies, that's why they come up with no excess cancers. But if they look at kids, and if they look at wind direction, and if they look at if they ignore the typical census tract and county data, then they will come up with some statistically significant responses. But my question is, why aren't people focusing on cost, and why aren't people focusing on Price Anderson as a way to stop this? Because if most homeowners knew that their liability would never be covered, and they would still owe a mortgage on a destroyed home, they would never support nuclear power. And I think that's a pretty common sense objection that cuts across Republican Democratic lines. The other objection that one might raise is cost. I think nuclear power died mainly of an acute attack of market forces. And when you look at all the cancellations, which outnumber the actual nukes, cost is the main reason that shut everything down. So unless somebody's going to subsidize nukes, which Trump would probably do, I think I'm optimistic that this is all going to be a no-go. because this has been tried before. So maybe I apologize for so much thrown at you at once, Paul, but 3 questions there about the studies, Price Anderson, and the cost.
Yeah, good questions. And again, I have similar concerns that the whole Advance Act that was again voted, the Senate voted, there were only 2 votes against it in the Senate. That was Markey and Sanders. All the rest of the Senate voted the Advance Act. The Advance Act went through Congress, both houses, both chambers, without even a public hearing on Price Anderson.
Right.
The Price Anderson Act passed without a single hearing. It went from 13 billion limited liability, Fukushima, what is it now, 300 billion more? Chernobyl, 600, 700 billion. The Price Anderson Act caps the limited liability for a nuclear accident now at 16 billion under the 16.6 billion under the Advance Act that just passed and Biden signed it. Okay, that was the Biden administration that okayed Price Anderson, and not only an incremental increase in the cost of the limited liability, but they took the 20-year renewal interval and they made it 40 years. So the next opportunity for Congress to review, what's Price Anderson protection going to do in the event of an accident, they gave it a 40-year extension. So it's out to 2065 now before it comes up before Congress again. So this has been a game of keep away. I don't know that we can really blame it on the public, but we could have mobilized more demonstrations, certainly, given that Price Anderson is an affront on humanity in that it hides the risk, it hides the cost, and it protects the lie that Price Anderson has now been extended to what are being claimed to be inherently safe. Now, if they were inherently safe reactors, why would they seek the umbrella of protection under the Price Anderson Act? This is, again, it's fraud. We've come up against a fraud on a national scale, which could lend itself to court action. Certainly, you'd think that hiding that risk, hiding the emolument of an entire industry is being protected by Congress and the White House. But what, now the concern is that do we save what what veneer is left? This is the discussion that we have to have. Are we going to rouse to the defense of the veneer of an independent agency? It's really a difficult conundrum.
At this point, I would like to ask Michelle because she put something in the chat that is of general interest, and I wonder if you would just come forward and talk to us about the entry that you made in the chat and what it's about.
Which one? Because I threw a lot into the chat.
I put USGAO nuclear regulations. NRC needs to more aggressively and comprehensively resolve issues related to the Davis-Besse, etc. So if you
that was an oldie but goodie from the GAO. Yeah. So that was that just to and one of the official reports. One of the key findings basically was that the the president or one of the senior officials at the operator personally went to NRC, took a flight out and met with NRC commissioners and helped get an extension to save on the cost, and so that the shutdown wasn't like at the end of 2000, whatever the year was, 2021, 22, 23, whatever the year that was. So basically it was just such an overt act, and that was recognized by the GAO of undue influence. And the GAO rarely does super scathing reports, but this time the GAO did. There's also a really good, I didn't put it in the chat, a really good Office Inspector General of the NRC report on Davis-Besse. Davis-Besse was a real near miss. It was a real near miss.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I will just throw in a couple of things just so people on the Advance Act, because as we've talked to members of Congress and Senate staffers and so forth after the act was passed, most of them had no idea what they were signing. It was thrown in like literally the last day. In fact, me and some other people in New York had a meeting with some of Schumer's staff while it was on the floor, which is like $1 short, a day late. But anyway, and so the U.S. and Biden was like freaking out about Russia, basically. The real push for nuclear, even though it was written into some of the laws, thanks to Joe Manchin, who basically, changed how the Build Back Better Act was going to be, and it's been split into these two other acts. But where you really got the aggressive Biden administration push for nuclear was after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that sort of just goes to Alfred's point on the underlying defense rationale and that a lot of people in Washington have for this industry.
Okay. Do you have a response to the things Michelle said, Paul, especially about the Advance Act that she brought up?
Well, I did want to mention that just to expound upon the Davis-Besse issue, while I was at Nuclear Information Resource Service, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request on that. And, that photo up in the upper left-hand corner it's the infamous red photo showing the rust roiling off the top of the Davis-Besse nuclear power station. That was in my FOIA, but the photo was so overexposed that you couldn't see what it was. And it took it going to the office of the Inspector General for it to finally get clarified of just how severe it was. So, there's been obfuscation even after the accident into the Freedom of Information process. But the obfuscation that the GAO report that Michelle talks about pointed that here you have the staff of the NRC, Office of Nuclear Regulation. These are the safety guys who said, don't let that plant go back online until we get to look at it. All these other reactors similar to Davis-Besse, they're all corroded. This is the only one that we've not really looked at in detail. And they wrote in that as per Reg Guide 1.174, you got to look at this risk. They wrote it up in an order. They gave it to senior management at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who put it in his back pocket. And when he met with the executives from First Energy, they said, look, we don't have fuel on site. to, we need to get this plant rolling. And they basically hastened the restart, and they operated it, and I guess they turned it on before the order was actually affected, and the senior manager had held it in his pocket, so they would have had to shut it back down, I think is what happened. And the First Energy convinced them that no, we can't shut it down now because we don't have fuel on site to get us through the inspection that you're asking for. So they didn't shut it down until much closer to the refueling, the regularly scheduled refueling outage. So again, it was a circus, but with the public health and safety being subordinated to a production agenda and a profit margin.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to, Alfred, I have to skip over you because someone on the phone has got their hand up, and I'm not sure I know who that is, but the person on the phone that ends in 6157, would you please ask your question?
Hi, this is Jake. Thank you for your excellent talk. Sorry I didn't catch your name. Why? Just a general question. Why the move towards deregulation now? Is it a general move within the Trump administration, or is there something else driving it?
Well, I think that deregulation is a polite way to say that they're really looking to dismantle regulation and become a self-regulated industry. I think
Yeah.
that's the goal that, in my view, is at work. But, any scrutiny, this industry is really allergic to scrutiny. Another thing that the Trump order affects is to get rid of the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards, which is these are the national lab guys. They ask too many questions. Too many questions is a burden. It winds up in delay. Even to try to work out a good enough story to obfuscate the facts. And so that is what this is all about, is to get rid of overly burdensome questions, and particularly about climate change. That really gets on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's nerves, because none of these plants that are operating and going through relicensing now, they never contemplated anything like climate change. They were never designed for climate change. They were never designed for, when reactors were built under large dams and with millions of acre feet of water, towering over, US nuclear power stations. There are 34 reactors under dams in this country. And that when that question gets raised, the NRC and the industry, they go running for cover because they can't explain, the fact that they were never designed for this kind of threat and risk, and they're not willing to afford what it would cost to even begin to address it. So that it's cost, it's embarrassment, it's exposing fraud. That's what I think is the reason these executive orders are coming out.
Thank you. And anybody who looks at a map of Oconee Dam and sees
Yeah.
the two.
Can I follow up with another question? Just a comment, which is that something in the budget. I mean, the whole budget is a mess. Something in the budget, Department of Agriculture. He's laying off the people within the Department of Agriculture whose job it is to inspect our food. let the food industry inspect our food. And so, what do you think will happen? More food poisoning and trichinosis and that kind of thing. I mean, that's something that's much more easy to understand, and yet he's getting rid of those guys.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
Jake.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that anyone who looks at a map of the Oconee Dam and sees the Oconee nuclear power plant and sees those dams just upriver, and they're earthen, one of them at least is an earthen dam, and one really major, because there's so much climate change, there could be a huge rainstorm, and the dam could either flow over or give way or something. It's really a big danger from climate change. And I'm going to call on Alfred again, because apparently you wanted to make a comment about something that was going on. And before we get too far from the subject, I want you to go ahead.
Thank you, Jan, and I don't want to dominate the conversation here at all. I'm glad you called on the other people. I just wanted to respond both to the very good points that Kristen made and that Roger made. And to me, the questions the questions they raise are so important, but it's my concept that what happens is, with the military imperative driving the nuclear enterprise, all these questions about environmental safety, public safety, cost, timeliness of addressing climate change, all these very important, sensible, and critical investigations are off the board, because we need nuclear weapons and we need the small modular reactors to drive submarines and aircraft carriers to deliver them.
Yes, okay. Thank you. There are more questions in the, Paul, you might want to respond to what Alfred just said.
No, I agree.
Yeah, you agree.
And I'll add one more thing, if I might, that
Go ahead.
Shell, you might have been with me, gosh, 4 or 5 years ago now. We were a group of New Yorkers in a very important New York Senate office, and meeting with the staffer about nuclear loan guarantees for nuclear power reactors. And the very first thing we did was ask the staffer his opinion of these nuclear loan guarantees. And he went virtually euphoric, saying, this is the most bipartisan topic on Capitol Hill. We love nuclear loan guarantees and subsidies. And it goes back, I think, deep into the Obama administration, which is connected with Nuclear Illinois, that you folks at NEAS know about, and Obama and Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod and Exelon and all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I would quickly mention, though, in follow up to Alfred's pointing out the questions on cancer studies. You know, another thought is, to mobilize state public health departments. You know, the really viable public health study was done by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Ironically, it came out at the same time as the National Cancer Institute published its 1990 cancer study that was, had a caveat that basically said, while this is the National Cancer Study, National Cancer Institute, said, while there were radioactive releases, recorded in around the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station in southeastern Massachusetts, it really wasn't significant enough to show statistical significance. And so they ignored it. But the Massachusetts Department of Public Health found a 400% increase in a rare adult leukemia, to say that there should be follow-up studies, particularly focused on children. And so, there is an opportunity. There's more of an opportunity at the state level than there is at the federal level. but you've got to, that's got to be a real careful choice. But it could very likely be focused on pediatric brain cancer, and more likely to be spot on in finding cancers are in Will County, Illinois, for example, or around the Dresden nuclear power station. That would be a really good study if it were somehow funded privately or through the state. But you could pick and choose, but we're up against a real behemoth for getting it done through the federal government, particularly now.
And Paul, if I could add that explanation that if there's not enough release of significant concern goes back to the much earlier discussion of the linear no threshold changes being proposed.
Yeah.
But I
Well-
add a note of humor about this. Many to show how much the world does not understand the dangers of nuclear power. The International Olympic Committee just chose Trestles Beach, just south of San Clemente, for their competition. It's a few hundred yards from where Songs deposits all their radioactive waste into the ocean. And they didn't even know it. And nobody's noticed it. Nobody's mentioned it. A pipe's 18 feet in diameter, blasting 1 million gallons a minute. And that's where they're going to have the International Olympic competition. I'd be very interested if they find out and cancel it. That would cause a huge uproar. But anyhow, the public, the world, the press, the media, nobody is paying any attention to this story.
The same thing happened in Japan, that they had or it's going to happen, that they are having surfing at a place where there's a lot of radioactive release from a power plant. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in the chat. I hope people will be paying attention to the chat, because we are not going to be able to get to everything, I'm afraid, that's in the chat. But I'm going to call on Stephen Sondheim because he's here and he's got his hand raised and he's got something to say. So Stephen, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Jan. Yeah, thank you, Paul. In listening to this, I've been thinking this for a while. I don't think there's going to be enough money for them to build all the SMRs and all the old power plants coming into being and all the new ones. I think they're going to run out of money. I really do. They're talking about, God knows, 80, 90 SMRs. Anyway, I don't think they're going to have enough money. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
And
well, when they were building the Seabrook nuclear power station in New Hampshire, and we were blocking the gates and walking into uninvited into executive office buildings, and sitting down and talking about the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And there were 4 utilities going bankrupt in that process. And there came a point where somebody, we just said, oh my God, they're going to, they're going to run out of money. And everything started to get quiet. People were getting tired. And they built it. They got money from United Arab Emirates, from Saudi Arabia. They funded it. They tried to change its name from Seabrook to Newbrook, just to get away from the unattractive that just sends people crazy. But I don't think that I don't think now is the time to wait. It's really, I understand the frustration and the hopelessness, but you can't rely on that they're going to run out of money, because they're making kleptocurrency now, or cryptocurrency.
You have a better name for it. Okay, Dave, go ahead
Well, they're
and
gonna make it, they're gonna make it up. They're gonna get it from, they're gonna get it from, again, they could very well be, Trump is talking to Saudi Arabia now for collaborations, you know?
It's,
That's how they got Seabrook finished.
yeah, there's too many reactors. They've got to cover the cost of 70 to 90% per reactor, and those reactors are now running per reactor at about 10 billion. I mean, those dollars add up fast. Now, could they pull off one or two from United Arab Emirates? Sure, sure. They're not going to pull off this whole nuclear renaissance because it's simply too expensive. Let me just make another quick point. People are upset about the military connection, which has always been there. But what people forget, if you were a really good military strategist, would you have all these concentrated generating centralized power stations? No, you'd have distributed power so that your whole grid was not at risk. And then secondly, you wouldn't have facilities that were so subject to terrorist attacks. And the people could take the pro-defense option and turn it against them. Nuclear is a disaster from a military point of view. The only reason it's useful to the nuclear industry is that the government itself doesn't have enough smart nuclear engineers, and nuclear engineers in general aren't as smart as other people. So they want to feed at the civilian trough for their expertise. But it seems to me that the centralized facility and the terrorist threat are a real problem. And if we think we have problems with nuke now, the whole industry is going to go bankrupt if there's one accident. And even if Trump succeeds, there will be. This is not an if, there will be.
yeah.
So
Well, these orders, they do, Trump's idea is that we need to have 10 1600 megawatt large reactors in the construction process by 2030. That's in the orders. So, and as well as, the Whitman sampler of mini reactors, you put a reactor in the back of a truck, they run the gamut. So from 1600 megawatts down to 5 megawatts, or they're but again, if they were worried about costs, that the way we operate this country is on a deficit. So the cost doesn't intimidate people who rely on other people's money, and this whole industry is built on other people's money.
yeah, but they've
It
got to get
has
the
been.
loans. They got to get the loan guarantees. They got to get the loan.
Again,
No reactor would be built without a 75 to 90%, loan guarantee. It just wouldn't happen.
Again, the Advance Act provided $250 billion in loan guarantees. And that's just the opening round. That Biden didn't even get to, go through the second term to enjoy his spoils for that. But, Trump is looking to compound it now by just removing, it's unreal. But again, I'm really concerned that we can't wait for them to run out of money when they've got their hand in our pocket.
I think the market will help solve it. How many people do you see running to build nukes right now? I don't see a groundswell. The market people are smart. They know their problems. They know the stats. The stats are not good because they don't just need the current funding. They need continuing funding. The market
Right,
will
well,
help us this time around, I think.
again, I'd like to think that, but
Yeah, well.
when these orders came out, the NuScale Power Corporation, their stock soared. These are the guys that they tried to run a scam in Utah for their a 50 megawatt
no carbon,
Yeah,
product.
no, yeah, it was a total scam. There are a number of, their stock got shorted because they were caught, you know, making deals with cryptocurrency outfits. They made one deal with 30 municipalities in 7 Western states to site the new scale reactors in Idaho. The Department of Energy gave them land, a nice donation from the federal taxpayer for 12 new scale small modular reactors, and they on a design that wasn't even certified. But they pitched these municipalities, and the Utah Municipal, no, let's see, Utah Association of Municipalities Power Supplies, UAM. And then even on paper, they started losing control of the cost of completion, the projected cost of completion.
Right.
They completely lost control of it. There was exits at the various points along the contract that these towns just started fleeing. And, so their stock on Friday just went through the roof when Trump said, look, we're going to do it for you. And the other one was Oklo Power. Okay. These are the reactors. You've probably seen them. They look like, houses of worship in the woods, and they are, these are the small 10 megawatt micro reactors. Well, guess who's running the US Department of Energy now? A board member of Oklo. Okay, now I dabble in AI just to see what it comes up with, but I asked AI on Google if what is it, Christopher? Oh boy, what's his name? Christopher, the new Secretary of Energy, having a
Right.
senior moment.
Right. Chris
I'm
Wright.
sorry? Chris
Isn't it
Wright,
Chris
thank you. Okay, so I asked AI, did Christopher Wright, who's also Liberty Oil and Gas, okay, who's now our Secretary of Energy, he was also the board member for Oklo, did he, get rid of his conflict of interest before he took the office?
No.
AI said, I don't know. We don't know. We can't identify that. So if AI can't say if he relinquished his holdings in Liberty Oil and Gas, Liberty Energy, and Oklo, who's to know?
He didn't.
So again, the markets are at play politically here as well as financially, and that's the danger, that this whole thing has been politicized with this megalo narcissist, a malignant narcissist.
I'm going to call on Dave. He's had his hand up a long time, and I hope that he still has a question. Go ahead, Dave.
Yes, it ties into where we left off a minute ago about the discussion with money. While it could be debatable, whether there will be the money or there won't be the money, or they'll invent some new cryptocurrency to finance them, who knows? But there is one reality that you can't escape, and that is spare parts. And I wanted to know, Paul, if you've been following or have any information you could share with the group here about the effects of the tariffs on the ability of getting the kinds of materials that are actually needed to construct a nuclear power plant. Arnie Gunderson has pointed out there are very few forges large enough in the world to manufacture vessel heads, for example. But with the
Exactly.
tariffs on, who the hell is even going to want to? Because we can't get them here. You know, nobody will buy them. So have you encountered any of this information on tariffs and the effects on the ability to get the materials needed to construct nuclear
Yeah.
plants?
Well, you know, we're seeing steel. You're right. Steel is, you know, we've not seen any of the tariffs actually come into effect though until sometime this summer. We'll be watching. Would be a key, you know, Khyber Pass that, particularly looking at steel, also uranium. You know, let's just get to it. You know, we're going to impose these tariffs on Canada, and you know, we only have 1% of domestic uranium currently providing, you know, enough to enrich for U.S. nuclear power plant fuel. 1%. The bulk of it, 99% is foreign. And a good bit of it, I don't know the exact percent right off the top of my head, is coming from Canada. And we, you know, just, you know, if Trump's tariffs on Canada were to go into effect, we would expect, you know, a tit for tat on that. But even projecting long term now, particularly with the expedited agenda that Trump is suggesting in these orders, it's just not going to be around. You know, so the fuel is, as the money is a bottleneck, the fuel's a bottleneck. You know, history shows the bottleneck. You know, how many, you know, we had a renaissance, government funding, you know, loan guarantees, production tax credits, and 34 orders, and they only got 2 finished. You know, the rest of them backed out. They waited for Vogel 3 and 4 to go through the ringer. They, you know, went in at a projected cost of 14 billion. They came out closer to 36, 37 billion. Nobody else is going to take a bite on that.
Right.
And they didn't.
Exactly.
And they didn't. But again, did that stop it? No, no. This is, and you know, as my colleague Kevin Camps has said, we are dealing with zombies.
If I
They
could,
get up and walk again. Okay. And, you know, so please, let's not rely on it in terms of any strategy. They're, you know, and again, it's just, you know, Trump wants to go to Greenland to get uranium. That ain't over yet.
Then we won't know till the glacier melts. Go ahead, Dave.
yeah, since I was going to mention this later, but since you invoked the holy name of Kevin Camps, I thought I'd bring it up now. I want you all to know that several of us, including Kevin, were around for the very first inaugural event of the very first nuclear renaissance in Chicago at the Palmer House Hotel during the Christmas holiday season. I believe it was December 1st or 2nd in the year 2001 or 2. They had this big coming out party. They were announcing what they were going to do with the Renaissance. And Kevin Camps showed up with a Dodge truck hauling a fake high-level radioactive waste shipping cask, but somehow he had wired a Santa Claus onto the hood of the truck, and he proceeded to encircle the Palmer House for several hours during their inauguration of the nuclear renaissance. I just thought it was kind of fitting to mention that. So we're on our, what, 3rd or 4th nuclear renaissance now? Anyway, just thought I'd mention a little bit of history.
Okay, I would like to call on Craig Schultz because he's made a comment in the chat that is very cogent for what we're discussing right now. And then I'm hoping it will be okay to change the subject because I want to call on Lori Johnson. She's brought up the subject of thorium, and I think it's worth, you know, just an exploration of thorium. So if that's okay with everybody, we're going to talk to Craig next, and then I want Lori to ask her question. So go ahead, Craig.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. And thanks, Paul, for your talk. And Nuclear Energy Information Service for doing these nights with the experts. We really appreciate them. I was reviewing all the letters that I've written in the last few years as we were updating our website at Michigan Safe Energy Future, and it became really clear that there's just an enormous amount of fraud going on with Holtec International about the way that it's getting funding. It gets funding by saying it's going to do something. For instance, proposing that they would decommission the plant. They get possession of the plant, and then we find out that while they were saying they were going to decommission the plant, they were also planning to restart the plant. And they get a loan guarantee for billions of dollars, or hundreds of millions of dollars from the state of Michigan. The money was their funding proposal. Why they needed so much money was because they're going to, for instance, replace the steam generators. But as soon as they got the money, then they said, well, no, we're not going to fix or not going to replace the steam generators. We're just going to put Band-Aids all over them. So it's just an example of just fraud after fraud. In the state of Michigan, that's the one thing that can really get you in trouble in a legal case. So in any case, that seems to be what's going on with Holtec. And there's no reason why they actually ever need to have a functioning SMR. They're making plenty of money just promising that someday they will. I hope that they don't, because they really don't have any experience in the industry building or operating. But those were my points about the money. And as I had studied for the last decade, I've been involved in this Palisades thing. I went and I looked at every single nuclear power plant project that had ever happened in the United States, and come to find out, all of our lobbying from the environmental standpoint, really the only projects that were ever canceled, there was one out east on the East Coast by some rich neighborhoods that you could say environmentally it was a concern because it was right next to some rich people's houses. But other than that, the only reason the nuclear power plant shut in this country is because there's some major component that's too expensive to repair, and then financially they decide to shut it down. So it's always about money. And I don't disagree with Alfred about the connection with the military uses, but when it comes to a strong factor, it really is about money. So one thing that each of us can do, because we don't have a lot of control over what happens in Washington, but the one thing that each one of us can do is, if every month we're sending money to an electric company to provide electricity, which is produced in any number of terrible ways that destroy the environment, we are complicit. When we send a paycheck every month to the electric company, we can't expect that they're going to shut their plant down. So the thing that we personally can do is we need to be reducing our energy consumption, electricity, and we need to be looking at ways that we can produce electricity that doesn't destroy the environment. And I'm talking personally. Those are things that we can do personally.
Any comment, Paul?
I agree. I think I'll just mention though that again, to emphasize that these orders, they're not only talking new reactors, they're also talking about relicensing reactors. The NRC and the industry right now are, they've already licensed about 7 units out to 80 years. We've got some of them rounded up on appeal under the NRC Office of the Commissioners. We're about to take them we did just file a final brief in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals on the fact that the relicensing doesn't consider climate change for 60 to 80 years, either for the generic environmental impact statement or a site-specific environmental impact statement. They're just going to do it on a current licensing basis. But they're also looking to restart not only Palisades, but 3 Mile Island, Kiwani, and every other. Trump's orders say that if you were closed down for any other, before you were ready to shut down, you could come in again. Or if you lost your construction license because it was too expensive, well, the government's going to help you with that too. And so there is a revival. It's going to look like a graveyard unearthing itself if these orders go through.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate, it's a perfect storm. We're setting ourselves up for another disaster. It's inevitable. We can't continue to run the plants for an infinite amount of time. And as we reduce the regulations, it's inevitable we're going to have a disaster. We can only hope that it's a smaller one, and that it's some sort of a wake-up call. I think maybe one thing that might be helpful is if we were to map, there's 90 some reactors operating in this country. If we mapped out a Fukushima or Chernobyl size cloud over each one of those reactors on a map, it pretty much covers the entire country. It's, we're basically, we need to continue putting the message out that we're at great risk. And then, when the disaster happens, we just, unfortunately, we'll have to say, we told you so, but be ready to be able to say, these are the logical, rational action plans we need to take to shut these plants down and have alternatives for the replacement.
Okay.
Let me just add that there is hope. I would rather not leave this conversation hopeless, but to speak to the fact that the market is affording renewables, even unsubsidized. The costs are coming down at such a rate that wind and solar, particularly solar, is growing despite the effort to throttle it to death by cutting off the subsidization for accelerating. So even without government money, the markets are still supporting accelerating renewable capacity. So
that's correct. That's true.
So that's that's a positive note, at least.
And Joe Romm put out a paper recently where he showed that China is the only country building new nuclears, and they're building 50 gigawatts in the next 6 years, but they built, 35. They built 35, they're building 35 gigawatts in the next 6 years, but they did 350 gigawatts of renewables in 2024 in 1 year. So like Paul said, there is hope. And we don't really, we've been here almost 2 hours now, and Lori still hasn't been able to bring up the subject of thorium reactors, and I don't want to read it Lori, unless you want me to, because I've got it right in front of me, your question, but you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, will you? Lori Johnson. I don't know if she's here. Are you here, Lori? I'm going to read her question. Does anyone have good data on thorium reactors? How much less radiation and other toxic pollution is emitted? Is there a fact sheet out there? So do you mind treating that question, Paul?
Yeah, I'm not aware of comparative analysis from thorium and light water reactors using enriched uranium. But to say that thorium reactors still need enriched uranium as part of their operating process. So they do have an ongoing release. And the other thing is that thorium reactors are viewed by the non-proliferation community as a quick way to get a bomb. So that's that doesn't make them desirable.
Well, it is it is 9 minutes to 9 here, and I guess 9 minutes to 10 in the East. But Norma Field is here, and she's had a lot to say in the chat. So Norma, I wonder if you just want to unmute yourself and say something about, she's put several things in the chat that you could read.
Let's see. Hi everyone. Well, thank you, Jen, and thank you all of you for this discussion. I guess I was just thinking, having been immersed for a while in anti-nuclear power movement in Japan, and I think most of us, including most Japanese, don't know that many, many more reactors, maybe twice as much, were refused rather than actually built. But that happened early on, and not surprisingly, once you had a reactor built, or once it was very, very hard to do anything legally. Once a reactor was built, you've got that infrastructure and you have all the cameras and talk about employment. And so the ones that got built, though people engaged in 10, 20, 30-year legal battles and also community battles, the people who were successful, it still came at a high price because you're in conflict within your own community for 20, 30 years. It's kind of a lifetime career. Nevertheless, that's really important. There's so many more lawsuits that have been entered trying to stop the restarts, and certainly there will be to start new ones since Fukushima. They've been impressive on many levels, crushed at the Supreme Court level, and yet it has been one way in which to get the research and the truth of the experience of hosting a nuclear reactor to develop a very rich historical record. Now, what can be done about that? Japan, I mean, it is extraordinary that in Japan, it's as if Fukushima had never happened, with the government declaring that nuclear power will be the centerpiece of its energy policy. Okay, we do, hope, like staying with it, right? Staying with the issue. That's realistic and necessary hope. Thank you all.
Paul, do you want to respond? Paul, would you like to respond? Is Paul frozen? Oh no.
I think I agree. I know that, but the concern is that I just saw there was a rapporteur from the United Nations that has come out against the that the Alps system for the filtration of all those, is it always going to be 1,000 tanks, or, there seems to be not much reporting on just how many tanks are out there now, but the discharge into the Pacific Ocean is, I think, constant now. And this rapporteur was raising concerns about the fact that particularly the fishing industry is getting decimated, or at least the exposure levels to the fishing industry are just getting higher and higher. And with growing concern, they were pointing out that the Japanese were relying upon seafood, and there's going to be rising concern about the impacts. A question that I would love for Norma to just, if you don't know, just to put it in your mind that why don't we see more statistics on spontaneous abortions or late-term miscarriage? Why aren't there more medical studies that are looking? And I understand that medical research connected to Chernobyl and Fukushima is repressed, or at least the funding is controlled. But it would seem that this, the idea of stillbirth and late-term abortion, late-term miscarriage, and early term as well, that these would be good indicators of the vulnerability of the most sensitive life to radiation. And do we know anything about that?
So,
Yeah, go ahead, Norma.
oh, sorry. I want to get back to the water issue, and then also now that the redistribution of contaminated soil, which is the new phase. But on the spontaneous abortion, I remember seeing something very, very early on. But as you may or may not know, the Fukushima health survey, so-called, restricted itself finally to just focus on pediatric thyroid cancer. And that monitoring is very important. Yes, so important that a big effort has been made by endocrinologists and pediatric experts to suppress it on the grounds that the monitoring of child thyroid cancer, which is non-invasive, causes unnecessary anxiety. This has been going on for many years. My own suspicion is that since pediatric thyroid cancer is the one cancer that the international authorities, so-called, recognized as being caused by the Chernobyl disaster, I think that the Japanese government is determined to redeem that concession and to absolutely not allow for recognition of the extraordinary clusters of, there are even pro-nuclear government experts who will say, yes, there's a cluster, but it has nothing to do with a nuclear reactor. So it's a very peculiar situation where you have experts who are willing to recognize that as a cluster, there's a very, very likely cause, a nuclear disaster. And just, it's like just saying it enough will make it go away, right? No, it has nothing whatsoever to do with a nuclear reactor. So that's one thing. And there's an enormous amount of self-censorship and mutual surveillance in Fukushima and elsewhere if you confess to a worry about your child's health, you can be accused of impeding Fukushima recovery. So that's an enormously important and thorny factor. On the Alps treated contaminated water, which is practically legally required, teachers get reprimanded if they let students get by and just saying the contaminated water. You have to say Alps treated. I don't know how many tanks are left, but since they haven't found a way to stop contaminated water from being produced, it's not clear whether there's an end in sight. There is a group of 340, 350 plaintiffs who live in the coastal region, now also having to deal with a Hanford-inspired model of recovery and growth. But anyway, plaintiffs trying to stop it, saying, we didn't succeed in preventing it, but we can still stop it since TEPCO says it's going to take 30 years. There's a huge lawsuit, I think with 40,000 plaintiffs in Korea, including those famous divers some of you may have heard about. And also they included whales and dolphins as plaintiffs, I think to their constitutional court to say that the government of Korea has failed to protect its own citizens from Japan's radioactive wastewater dumping. But the third thing I wanted to get to is, okay, so keep dumping this water. Now, there was all of this soil gathered together at great cost in the effort to so-called decontaminate schools, homes, etc., and close to the exclusion zone. It was enormously expensive. It was also radioactive labor that enforced radioactive exposure. So all this soil that was put into bags and carefully moved again, necessarily with some, how long are these bags good for? Collected, and there's an intermediate storage place. And now the government it's been trying to say we can reuse this, because there are, what is it? Is it 108 becquerels per kilo is the allowable level of contamination for waste from functioning nuclear facilities. But there's an 8,000 becquerels per kilo allowance for anything related to Fukushima. So anything under 8,000 becquerels per kilo qualifies for reuse. And they say, oh, well, it can be used in public gardens and road construction. We're even going to take enough soil to make more than a few flower pots for the prime minister's residence. This is really extraordinary, to take this soil and to move it all around the country and dump it everywhere, and with a claim that there'll be enough topsoil so that there will be no health impact. It remains to be seen how well this does, given that there are many weather events that are getting more and more fierce as elsewhere in Japan. So this is what's going on.
Well, thank you for that, Norma. And I think we've gone past our time, and I want to turn this over to Dave to wrap it up. No, okay.
Okay, thank you, Jan. And Paul, I say this sincerely, you are a institutional treasure. The decades you've put into this work, and so many people owe so much to you, and certainly to Linda and Beyond Nuclear. We all look up to you as allies, friends, and are very appreciative of all you've done. So thank you very much for being with us tonight and sticking around a little bit of overtime.
Thank you.
You earned some karma credits on that one. So, okay, a little bit of housekeeping. As I mentioned earlier, you will receive the chat tonight, and it is a very rich chat with lots of active links and places you can go to find out more information. So make sure you open it up and root through it. Some very good stuff there. The event has been taped, and I am pleased to say that NEIS finally found someone who on a regular basis is posting our Night with the Experts to YouTube. So my guess is within the next several days, this event will be on YouTube and you'll be able to share it with anyone you want, no problem. Next month, we are real excited. I should probably let Jan do this, but on June 26th, which is our next night with the expert, is that when we have Joe Rahm, Jan?
Oh, no, Joe's coming in July.
Yeah, we got,
In June, we're having Jason Sally, and Connie knows a lot about him. He has been writing about nuclear installations in Ohio and their effect on communities. He lives in those communities, he writes about them, and he's also going to appear on the 3rd of July. He's going to be with Terry Lodge. The two of them are going to give a program. Let me bring it'll just take me a second to look at
well,
this.
maybe you could just put it in the chat, Jan. That's all right.
Oh, I can't put it in the chat, but maybe Connie could.
All right.
Connie might have the link to put it in the chat. So if you want to hang on a few minutes,
Actually, I think we should wrap it up, but if you send that information to us, we'll send it out with the chat tonight. That's for sure.
Okay. I'll be sure to do that then, and maybe talk to Connie about it. But anyway,
So in
that's going to
July,
happen very soon on the 3rd of July. Jason, Sally, and Terry Lodge are going to be talking about military and nuclear.
so my mistake, July 31st, which is actually the 5th Thursday, is the last Thursday. That's when we're going to have Joe Rahm.
Right.
And, many of you know Joe is a longtime climate activist, and he had some very, very harsh words that appeared in the press about the executive orders. So you'll be getting that. As I started out the evening tonight, I'm going to also attach as attachments to your email a press release we did recently about the Illinois moratorium repeal, but also because it has many of the quotes from Allison McFarland and Joe Rahm and several others that you may find useful in your work. So that'll be a part of your email tonight from NEIS. So on that note, thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you got a lot out of it. We look forward to seeing you next time. And as always, we encourage you to bring others. We need to start doubling the attendance at these things so we can really make a difference moving forward. Okay, thanks again, and no nukes.
Bye-bye, Al.